Welcome to Sachs Realty's Tuesday Night Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything real estate. Each week, we deliver expert information enabling you to make better informed decisions while keeping more money in your pocket. If you're interested in real estate, this is your show. Welcome to our Tuesday Night Podcast. We are live, a little different format tonight. As you can see, we're kind of no table in front of us, just hanging out, sitting in these comfortable chairs with a friend of mine, Dave Thurston. He's a real estate attorney. He is not a stranger to our podcast. He's actually been on several times. And Dave, why don't you just introduce yourself, and we got a lot to cover tonight. We're going to talk about what we're seeing in the real estate market, the housing market, and already the impact, bad impact, in my opinion, that the NAR lawsuit is having throughout the industry, at least here from my eyes, what I'm seeing personally, what I've experienced already with buyers and sellers, both, in my opinion, losing as a result of what's already out there. So we'll dive in, but Dave, my friend, introduce yourself.
Dave Thurston. I'm a president of a title company called Crown Title Corporation, which is licensed to do business in about 40 states now. And I have a law practice that services various servicers, developers, agents. So glad to be here.
Yeah, and you have a good pulse of the industry too. You and I have had multiple conversations about how we already know we need to prepare to be taking a haircut in income. Good or bad. I mean, whether it's warranted or not, we both have had conversations with, how are we planning on moving our business in the future, with accepting the fact that there will be less for everybody that serves the industry. And we've had mixed feelings, you and I going back and forth. We think it's good in a lot of aspects. It will cut a lot of the people out of the industry that really don't belong. Some of the problems that we've had with the agents that shouldn't really be agents, and not just agents. I mean, there are bad actors in title. There's bad actors in loans as well.
Sure, absolutely. I don't think you can be good at something doing it part-time. And if you're going to hold a professional license, it should be a 24/7, eat, drink, and sleep it. And I think if you made a list of the successful people you knew in every part of our industry, that's what they would have in common.
Yeah, well, you can't do it with some. I mean, you can only handle so many clients being part-time. It's just too demanding, the industry.
Well, and especially in these times where you have high regulation, right? It's very bureaucratic. Regulations are changing constantly. So you really have to be doing it full-time to keep up.
Yeah, or they need attorneys like you to get them out of trouble.
Well, unfortunately, Todd, everyone calls us too late. They're already in trouble.
I can tell you, though, a lot of people are saying, I'll just hire a real estate attorney to do my transaction instead of having an agent. And we will talk about that tonight, okay? Don't let me forget that.
Okay.
That might be a plug for you.
Okay.
There might be some money there for you.
Okay.
So, but anyway, I do want to start by saying that recently I've encountered two problems with this lawsuit. And neither one of them are good for the buyers or sellers. So I'm just going to talk about two scenarios. We'll get your opinion and weigh in on it. I was in an open house, and I had an agent that negotiated. They brought their client through, and their client was walking through the open house, and the client was negotiating their commission with me, as if the seller wasn't paying enough. And what the agent said, and this is actually not the two cases that I want to talk about, but I want to get your opinion on this. What the agent had said was, the seller's not paying enough money for a buyer's agent. And it was a really big commission. I mean, the seller was offering about almost $30,000 to the buyer's agent. Okay, so not a small amount of money, right? And the agent was saying that wasn't enough, and was saying, if I can get your client enough money, the list price essentially, can I get more money? What's your opinion on that? Number one, from a legal standpoint, what problems does that pose?
Well, I think from a legal standpoint, it's the exact thing the settlement agreement was trying to prevent. Your value to your client has to be that value regardless of what the sales price is and regardless of who's paying it. So I understand we're in uncharted waters here, but that conversation really runs against the spirit of the ruling, I think.
Would you, from a legal standpoint, say that agent was putting their own interest above their clients?
Yeah, because she or he was implying that the offer wouldn't be forthcoming unless her compensation was increased.
Exactly.
And that's not really the way it goes, right? That's not the way the spirit. I mean, the reason we got where we are was because the way the system was set up, it was easy theoretically to shoot holes in it. And I think this is a prime example of it. So,
well, let me go into the next one then. So the situation was that they advertised commission, because right now we can still advertise commission.
when is that cutoff, Todd? When's the?
So they're saying mid-July, okay? And sort of laying the foundation for this. And guys listening, this is really applying to buyers and sellers. Leaving the real estate agents out of this completely, just focusing on the buyers and sellers. This is why you need to pay attention to this, because I think what's happening with this lawsuit, and Dave's an attorney, I mean, he can correct me if he'd like, but I think the ones getting paid here are the attorneys in the deal, in the lawsuit.
Right.
I think that we had a situation, right, that came to a head, whatever, somebody took it on, an attorney took it on, and ran with it. And there's a lot of people that believe that the NAR lawsuit, and we're not going to talk the whole show about this, but I want to get this out in the open. But a lot of people feel that the NAR lawsuit came about, or was allowed to sort of come about, because they wanted to shift the blame of the housing market, the unaffordability in the housing market, to the agent or to the brokerage or their systems. And ultimately, I mean, NAR really wasn't penalized that much. The settlement is not significant when you look at 1.5 million members that can absorb this through the membership fee by just raising fees, because they're going to pay it over the next 3 years. So it wasn't a significant deal or impacting NAR and some may say from a political aspect, they came out of this thing pretty well.
Yes, but we certainly have an administration in DC that believes our industry is not operating ethically or properly, and would love to have the fees reduced. And I think some of that is, like the title industry, the real estate industry, we haven't done a great job of justifying our services, or marketing our services, or branding our services in a way where people necessarily see the value of what we do. And I think we both had that in common. So I think if I'm an agent, with change, there's opportunities in everything. So, what you're trying to do is educate people, educate yourself, read everything you can, and figure out where the opportunity is for you. And I think that's going to change market by market. Like right now, if I'm listing a property in Baltimore County, I'm not paying the buyer's agent that much money if I'm the seller, and I really know what I'm doing. Because what do you think, Todd? Is there 30 buyers for every house now here?
Well, let's talk about that. Right. Okay.
But if the market shifts, if it goes to a buyer, now I might list it for 5%, but I might pay the buyer's agent 4%, because if it goes to a buyer's market, I want more buyers to get non-contingent, maybe get up over listing a little bit. So I think a savvy seller will work it. I don't think the buyers are savvy is the problem, but what this lawsuit's supposed to do is, it's incumbent on the realtor to educate the buyer and charge a fair fee for their representation. And that fee needs to be what the buyer believes is fair, not the seller built into the sales price. And I think that's where the rub was.
See, and the issue, and look, I don't disagree with you. Anybody that follows my channel, I am not advocating for more of the same, because I think that we've lacked leadership as an industry, in my business, not yours, but as brokers.
I think we have too. But go ahead.
We've completely let it run amok, and we're not managing the way that we should, right? I'm not saying me, because I think that I do, but I think a lot of agents are running around there and they're doing basically whatever the hell they want. And the broker is just concerned about the numbers. But here's the issue, and because this is what I just experienced. So you have a situation where now, and buyer agency, by the way, a contract between a buyer and a brokerage as a buyer's agent is a binding contract, binding up the buyer. So if a buyer wants to have an agent and they go sign a buyer agency agreement, brokerage agreement, they can't really operate without that agent. So whatever they've agreed to fee-wise in that agreement, they're bound by. If the seller doesn't pay it, they have to come out of pocket. I had a situation where a seller decided that, you know what, we're going to negotiate on what's offered to the buyer's broker. And what we found were the agents were not showing the property, or were complaining about it and standing between the transaction from even happening. And we had a situation where the agent was going to let the deal fall apart, because what they were doing was saying, look, the seller needs to pay this or it ain't happening with this buyer. How do you deal with that?
Well, I certainly think it runs, again, I think it's certainly contradictory to the spirit or the settlement agreement. I think it also, based on the facts you're telling me, you got ethics problems. I look, when I was in law school, I don't know how many hours of ethics class we had, but I would tell you it all boils down to, I was looking at the grandmom rule. If you were representing your grandmom, what would you tell her? You wouldn't let your grandmom not in the house, right? So it's certainly unethical. It's certainly against the ruling.
But it's not illegal.
Well, I don't know enough about it, enough about the facts, but I will tell you that's what the agents going forward have got to realize. You're going to have to educate, and you're going to have to really, really sell your value. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to put the consumer first, because all these consumer protection laws in these states, I just had an issue that was resolved today against a servicer by the state of Maryland. But the state of Maryland with these consumer protection laws are wide sweeping. And in this situation, the consumer is not being represented correctly.
They don't know it, though.
Oh.
I would bet that they didn't know it. I would bet that the conversation, they didn't know that the agent was having a conversation that was basically saying, if your seller doesn't pay me more money, this deal isn't happening.
Well, I was all, in the past, I've been asked a million times to try to enforce buyer-broker agreements in some respect. And, my question to the agent is always, how much did you tell them about this? Like, how much did you educate them? Did they really understand that if they went and bought a different house that you weren't around, that you were owed the compensation either way? And, as you know, it was never explained to them. So it's a different, look, we're under a microscope. And you're going to have to really, really take a spin that the consumer is the primary concern, and represent the consumer as if it was your grandmother.
So let me ask you a question. Would you take them to the ethics board?
Yeah, I always hate to do those things, but I think that maybe. Maybe. I think a lot would depend on who the agent was, and could you have a heart-to-heart with them, and maybe let them see the light.
How about if you have a conversation with them that said, so basically what you're telling me here is that you're standing in the way of your buyer getting the property because you're not making enough money.
Yeah.
And that agent said, yes.
Yeah, certainly a call to the broker would help if they would be involved. I know some brokers won't get involved. And then I think there is definitely an ethics issue.
So let's talk about the next scenario.
And one more thing, so, you know, some of what happened with this NAR settlement, I know that where we are, MAR are going to come out with their form soon. You know, you could see, depending where the lobby starts, is you could see statutory remedies and regulations that change this and change the structure.
Give
And
us
you
an
could see-
example.
Well, I think that, I know that if the people where we are in Annapolis that make the laws, they're going to trust MAR to clean this up and give you
Which
guys.
is Maryland
Association of
Realtors.
Realtors.
Right.
Or GBBR, whoever you're using your forms. It's MAR's your forms, right? So they're going to trust them, and I think in all states they're going to trust them to get this in what they feel is compliant. Okay? If not, you might see different statutes that spell it out how, you don't want that, right? You want freedom, but they could tell you how it's going to be done if you don't come to a reasonable commercial standard of doing it.
What do you think, and I have another scenario that I want to talk about, but before we do that, part of this settlement is that they want to make the MLS, they want to remove the fields on the MLS that show any buyer broker compensation. So if, for example, if we're splitting a fee however way, that the seller agrees, and the way that the buyer broker or the listing agreements are designed is that the seller is authorizing the listing broker, authorizing them to cooperate with a buyer's broker, right? To pay them. The seller is authorizing that, right? I don't know how they won this lawsuit based on that anyway, but the seller is authorizing. The theory here, and what you just said, was that you want to reduce the cost or the fees. The seller's going to want all the money. It's not going to reduce the cost of the house.
Well, if you look at what the seller's netting, it could, right?
But it's not getting the buyer any less money.
No.
Okay, it may be making the seller more money. It's netting the seller more money. Maybe if in fact there isn't some kind of collusion on the backside of it, or what the seller's not realizing, that they're not getting as many offers because the buyer's agent or buyer's broker is standing in the way of that.
But that's why I think it's going to shift market to market. I think when you have a seller's market and you can get 20 offers or 30 offers above list, why are you compensating the buyer broker 3%?
Okay, but here's the thing. I'm not disagreeing with you. A lot of people say that buyers agents haven't done anything, right? That the buyers went to the open house, they looked at the house, they told their agent they want it. I just had a situation, an offer came in, and I said, I don't see a showing that you registered a showing for this property. And the agent said, well, I haven't seen it. My clients came through an open house. I said, you mean to tell me you went and wrote an offer on a house that you haven't even seen? He said, my clients are competent. Well, what do they need you for? Right? Why have you? Right? But he's trying to negotiate on something that he hasn't even put his eyes on, which should be a violation, in my opinion anyway, to the license.
Sure.
Right? I mean, that would be like you not having any of the facts and trying to represent somebody.
Well, he's not the procuring cause of the transaction.
Correct.
Yeah.
Describe that.
Well, what that really means is that you were actively involved in the showing of the property, the evaluation of the property, and the structure of the contract. If you didn't do all three of those, then you're not technically the procuring cause of the transaction.
So let's get back to the fact that the MLS, they want to make it a violation or make it impossible if you're an agent using an MLS, a multiple listing service, which is owned by the boards, which is really trickled down from NAR. NAR owns the keys to the kingdom still.
Sure.
They're saying that if you're a seller you can't advertise an offering to compensate the buyer's agent. You can advertise that you're going to give them closing cost help. You can advertise you're going to give them a new garage door. You can advertise that you'll cut their grass for 5 years if they buy your house. You can advertise some kind of a contribution, but you can't advertise what. Do you think that it's NAR's responsibility, the judges that are involved, the lawyers that are involved, do you think that they should be able to tell or preclude a seller from making an offering to a buyer's broker?
Absolutely not.
What gives them the power of that?
I think that if what's fair to the seller, and we're talking about what's fair to the buyer, what's fair to the seller is allow them to communicate really what they want for the house. Right?
So now, once again,
do you think the MLS should be open to the public?
100%.
Is anybody making a case for that right now?
I don't know. Maybe you will. Maybe
Well, I mean,
there's
that would
opportunity
certainly
for
that
you.
would certainly change buyer representation. You know, I just think the whole thing comes down to transparency, right? And I think that the more transparent you can be with whether you're with sellers or buyers, the more transparent you can be, and if you're fair, okay, I think you're going to get through this. You're going to navigate through it.
Well, let's talk about what you just said. Let's say that the sellers have access to the MLS. Now, I'm not talking about Zillow for sale by owner.
You mean the seller or the buyer?
The seller.
The seller, okay.
Let's say the seller doesn't need a listing agent to post on the true MLS, what the industry uses to aggregate all of the sites out there.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that a seller can't say, I want to sell my own house, put a sign in the yard, and that they can't, I mean, that's what they should really be advocating for. I mean, if they're going to sue somebody, let's say the seller should have right to use the system. But they can't. They can't they need a broker who is a member of NAR
Right.
to publish that, whether they do it for whatever they decide to negotiate. And they do like a la carte service. Should the seller have access to not have a listing agent and get their property without the use of a realtor on the MLS?
So you're really arguing whether that particular model violates the antitrust laws, right? So if it would be deemed by a court of law that particular model created unfair competition or inflated prices to the consumer, then you certainly have an argument there. I don't do a lot of that type of work, so I don't know what the current federal courts are. But there are a lot of class action attorneys sitting around looking at the settlement agreement that NAR got. You have so many more lawsuits that are going to follow because you have a lot of independent brokerages that weren't part of that settlement. They're going to get served soon. You have agents, maybe you're going to have agents that exclusively represented buyers. They're going to get sued soon. So the litigation bar is ripe to blow this out of the water. So I don't think we've seen the last of this. And I think how policies will change and how things will be implemented will evolve over time. And I think it will be different market to market depending on if it's a seller's market or a buyer's market, how things are treated. But in the meantime, I think you have to try to find opportunity with it, and you have to be transparent with your clients. And are fees going to come down? Unfortunately, they're probably going to shrink a little bit.
Okay. You said that there was exclusions in the lawsuit. A lot of people think that the National Association of Realtors sold their members, sold them out.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the structure of it really to comment on that. I was surprised it was that quick of a settlement. I don't even think they had certified the class yet. I'm not sure about that fact. I didn't think they did. You're saying that when you really look at it, NAR may have gotten off cheap, and maybe that was their motivation. But I think time's going to tell. But I think there's more lawsuits coming.
Well, according to my attorney, okay, and you know who our law firm is, one of the best, probably,
Sure.
In Maryland, but
Yeah.
certainly probably this side of the eastern seaboard, Mississippi.
Yeah.
My attorney's practice was the counsel for Maryland Association of Realtors before they brought in their in-house counsel. So
Right.
we're talking about,
Yeah.
they're in the know, right? So my attorney has said that, and I think the number was 93 brokerages in the United States that were members of NAR were carved out of this settlement. And I think that the number was $2 billion. I think he told me that it was in 2000. If your brokerage did more than $2 billion in, in commissions in the year of 2022, and if you read the articles, I think it says from 2021 to 2023, you are not covered under this lawsuit, which excludes really big brokerages that haven't been sued yet.
Right.
And so what happens is, unless they contribute to this fund, and of course your errors and omissions insurance is not going to cover you on that. You have to come out of pocket of cash, and I think that the minimum is $5 million if you just hit that $2 billion threshold. $5 million in cash you have to put into this fund. So I think that these brokerages are sort of, trying to stop this from being approved that the judge already signed, and now it's just a formality. Can they get this, what the judge has signed already, can they get that overturned? Is it even possible?
At this point, I don't think they would have standing. I mean, you'd have to talk to a federal appellate litigator, but they weren't part of the lower ruling. So they didn't plead themselves into the case. They didn't countersue anybody. Unfortunately, what you may see is some of those brokerages go into bankruptcy.
Can they just start back up again?
Start under a new, I mean, it depends how they're structured, how their companies are structured. But I mean, if you're I'm not going to mention any names, but there's certainly probably an independent person here in Maryland that's, I don't know, I'm not sure they're going to write a check for $5 million if all they really need to do is start another company and transfer the agents.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the housing market a little bit. Well, just on the tail end of that, we're now starting to see where the buyer's agent is writing addendums with their client's offer that says that the seller is going to pay them more money. Not a very smart move, doesn't put a good taste in the mouth of the seller. And in a competitive market like we still see here in Maryland, not a good move. But let's move on. We're going to take some questions here. If you all have questions for Dave, certainly comment them in. We'd love to hear from them. Dave, you have an opportunity to have Dave address those. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. We are going to get to Dave's line of work, with title, what happens when you buy a property. We've covered it before on our show, but we'll revisit that. And some do's and don'ts when you're titling properties or buying properties. But let's kind of talk about market conditions, because we've seen, at least here in the last couple of weeks, we've seen a big release of air in this market, this buyer's market. Have you seen the same thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're definitely in a tough market. We're having the stats better than me. I think we're still having a pretty significant inventory problem here. Foreclosures are up probably 10%, but that's not really going to solve the inventory problem. It's not enough of them. And you're still a year away, even though the filings of the foreclosures are up. They're still a year away from being remarketed. So now I would agree. I think that the rates ticked down, I forget, maybe February, March or something, and we had a little bit of an increase, but certainly order volume for us is down the last month.
Are you seeing that? Give us a sort of like a profile of the deals that you're seeing now. Are they mostly cash? Because by the way, I mean, Dave closes the business out. So when a buyer purchases, and every state is different. In Maryland, the buyer pays for the title services for the most part. There are other states where the seller does pay it, but Maryland here, the buyer pays it. So the buyer really picks for the most part which title company they use. But Dave sees a lot more transactions than I do. So Dave, give us sort of like the flavor of what do the deals look like now that are coming across your desk?
I think they're all unique, right? I think that, what I call traditional deals where there's an agent on each side and buyer, seller, lender, maybe, an FHA or an 80% loan to value. They're probably, I think they were down maybe 30% in 2023. I think they're probably down another 20% now because the prices are still, excuse me, in most of the jurisdictions I'm dealing with, the prices are still where they were or close. The rates are much higher. I think the consumer's getting beat up. I think that, you can say inflation has came down, but if you look at what people really need, which is energy, gas, shelter, food, those prices haven't come down. So what people that are living paycheck to paycheck or have a little bit of money saved, they're still feeling the pain of that. And I think disposable income's down. And then I think people have had frustrating experiences in the traditional market trying to buy homes. Once you put 10, 11 offers in and you've been shut down every time. So what are we seeing? Well, we're seeing mom and dad or friends of the family fronting money, buying down rates, some type of assistance to try to get them in a house now, figure it out later. I mean, we're lucky that we're an extremely diverse title company. So our REO division's improved, our commercial division's booming. We have some government contracts that are booming. So that division, which carried us for a long time in 2021 and 2022, it's kind of flipped, right? The other divisions are carrying us now. So I understand if you're an agent out there, I know you're probably in the worst market. They thought 2023 was the worst market in 30 years. I think 2024 is probably going to be worse when it's all said and done, unless something really impactful disrupts it, which I don't see right now. I don't see the rate adjustment we thought was coming is probably not coming.
What are you seeing mostly in loans? More government insured loans? FHA, VA, or what, cash? What are you seeing the most of?
I think that's probably still a mix. I'm seeing more cash deals. I'm seeing higher gifts of equity between family members and those kind of things. So, I think in hot markets, I think there's still a decent amount of properties that are off market that are getting sold. Your neighbor wants to move out. They want to go to an assisted living. The son of the neighbor buys that house. Never hits the MLS. So see a lot of those types of deals too.
Yeah, we're seeing it too, off-market deals.
Yeah.
Right? You don't even need the sellers actually are finding in a lot of cases the buyers.
Well, in certain neighborhoods, I mean, you know it because you live in a neighborhood that's highly sought after with good schools. I mean, people are going door to door. My son wants to move back, or my son's getting out of the Army or coming home, or whatever it is, and we'll help them buy it, and let's get it done.
Yeah. Let's take some questions. All right, so any advice to prepare for a 8300 form hearing with the IRS and advice for timing, depositing cash before buying a home?
I'm not sure what Form 8300 is. Todd did.
I don't know.
Is
Joe, can you Google Form
8300?
Yeah. Maybe we can pull it up here. How about IRS, or how about advice for depositing cash before buying a home? So I guess maybe what they're saying is they have cash that isn't showing up in the bank, or isn't in the bank. What's the curing process for that before it's going to throw, a flag?
Yeah, at one time, if you put more than $10,000 in the in the bank of cash, it was a reportable incident to the IRS, right? So I don't know what the cutoff is now. I don't think it's changed, but you can probably find out. But
So this
the lender's going
8300 form is a report of cash payments over $10,000
Yeah.
received in trade or business. So this is the form that you were talking about. So any advice to prepare for that? So I guess that's what they're saying. You make $5,000 increments? Do you make 25? I mean, what do you do that isn't going to?
Yeah, I think I would probably talk to a loan officer. If you're going to try to use that cash as a down payment, you probably need to talk to a loan officer. So you're going to pass muster through their underwriting. They're going to want to source that. The bank has an obligation, just like we would. We don't take cash to do closings.
Somebody can't just bring a bag of cash in?
No, because we can't secure it, number one. And number two, if we take more than $10,000, we'd have to report it just like the bank. We'd have the responsibility to report it. If we take more than $10,000 and don't report it, we're in a sense money laundering, which is not something we want to really be involved with.
What if they're talking about in this scenario that they want to pay cash for the whole home?
They're going to have to put the cash in a bank and wire us the money.
But I mean, as far as not getting a loan, any advice, or maybe they should, as far as taking the cash underneath the mattress and essentially putting it in the bank before they actually write the check for the house.
You're going to have to comply with the federal banking regulations to get the cash into a.
And they want to know where the money's coming from. They ask you all kinds of questions.
Well, they're going to report it to the IRS, and then the IRS may ask the questions, right? So, I mean, obviously, what professionals that have licenses that can be suspended or revoked don't want to be involved with is taking large amounts of cash that hasn't been sourced and allowing assets to be bought. In fact, there's all kind of financial, the FinCEN regulations. We have to report cash deals in certain counties and certain states. So even if you had the money in a legitimate account and you wire me $300,000 of cash to buy a property, in certain counties and certain states, we have to report that cash transaction.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's good or bad? I mean, what's your honest opinion on that?
Because, more and more what's happening is government's getting bigger. They're trying to use title companies and other companies to do some of their legwork for them. And they want to try to figure out who's buying these properties, because there were some issues with Chinese government buying properties near NSA, or an asset that a property we would think would be an asset that we wouldn't want to ever be compromised, right? So I don't know how much of a concern that should be, just because most of this is a cyber war now. But there are a lot of foreign governments and foreign people buying real estate here, and the government wants to track that.
Sure they do. They want to track everything. They may send one of those, new packing IRS agents out to see you, right?
Hey, listen, I'm not trying
knocking on your door.
I'm not trying to have any trouble with those.
You just take that bag of cash for that real estate transaction.
Right.
All right. We got another one. Charlton Zimmerman here. Question for Dave. Do you see a lot of companies like Blackstone come into Maryland, or just local small investment in single multifamily units?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So a year or two ago, there was a lot of, started to be a lot of chatter on the news that we shouldn't allow companies buy up major pools of assets, and we've done a lot of those deals. I think the biggest deal we did was about 2,000 single family homes in the Midwest, but you don't see it a lot in Maryland, because most entities that are buying those houses, they want the price of that house not to exceed say 250,000 or whatever it is. So they're mostly buying in say Indiana, Ohio, places like that, where it's rural and they can still buy a chunk of them at once, and the rentals will support it. So I don't know really the percentages of it. I just know the business that we've done, very little of that's been in Maryland, and the city of Baltimore, the real estate taxes are high. So when a REIT would come in to evaluate that deal, and they evaluate the rentals, and then you tackle on high real estate, so the real estate taxes may be triple what they are, say, in Muncie, Indiana. So they can get the same rent in Muncie, Indiana, the same contract price, with less taxes, no ground rent, and less crime. That's a more desirable portfolio to them than what Baltimore would be. So you don't see a lot of it in the city. And then because we have a lot of government workers here and a lot of healthcare entities that employ, the prices, as you know, in our counties are fairly high, I think, compared to the national average.
Yeah, it knocks out the
Montgomery,
investors.
Howard, Baltimore higher than if you would go out west.
At least to get the numbers right, to get the
Right.
bulk of where somebody wants to come in and buy, let's say, a portfolio
Right.
of rental properties. I think a lot of the landlords that have 4, 5, or 8 units, they're trying to obviously maximize their price. And lately, they're not going to bundle those up necessarily as a portfolio. They're going to get it to either a vacant status or a month-to-month status where they can get a retail buyer in there and make as much as they can.
Right.
And we don't see the new construction here in Maryland that
Correct.
we see
There's
all across the country.
Right, there's no build to rent. I mean, I think,
Right.
what these large REITs are doing now are trying to identify places they could build to rent.
Or they get a wholesale deal from the builder where they'll buy a street or a block or this or that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Guarantee, a lot of times in the South now, if you go through the Sun Belt, they'll guarantee the builder a certain amount of money per, and then take them down at the end. And the builder has instead of having a risky subdivision, like you've been there, they have a certain, they might make a little less in the end, but they have zero risk going into it because they have a contract to take them out.
Right. Sort of mitigates their potential
Right.
for loss. All right, let's take another one here. People need to see the actual sold prices on these homes. I know where they're going with this. How much was given in concessions? What was the actual selling price? That should be sold price used for comps. And we appreciate your comment here. So, a lot, Dave, of states like Texas, for instance, they don't show sold prices.
Yeah.
Prior sold prices on the MLS or like Zillow or Realtor.com. They eliminate that. Why do you think they do that?
I'm not sure. I mean, to me, I think the Carolinas are like that. I'm trying to think of Carolina deeds. When we do deeds in Carolina, we don't put the contract price in the deed. You set a separate certification, which is, I guess, how they assess the properties. But
So you don't skip that.
well, you're not going to skip that.
Right, you don't
You're not gonna skip
forget the
that.
tax assessor.
You're not going to
saying
skip that.
Right.
But it goes back to, I think, what I said. Transparency. Why not? If you have to be transparent with your buyer and your seller, and the consumer's got to be transparent with the title company and the lender, why aren't the entities that are running this transparent?
Well, that makes them use a realtor. Because
Maybe not.
I mean, the way to get the comps for them would be for the realtor to have that private access to the MLS, which is where they can find out what the comps are. Because the public can't find that out necessarily on their own.
In Maryland, you could pull the deed. It would have the consideration in the deed, and at most, a vast majority of states do it that way. But you wouldn't know about the concessions or the real estate commission.
Right. And I think that's a big thing with the contribution. So we've seen over the course, and I know when you're looking at a deal, you're looking at the contract, you're seeing a contract price, and you do end up seeing the contributions if there's cash that was provided by the seller to the buyer for closing costs, things like that. You see that.
Right.
But you're not really involved in the negotiation process of it. That all happens before it hits your desk. But what we have seen, which a lot of people don't realize, that keeps the prices inflated, especially on the new home sales, is that these add-ons the builders are giving away, because the builder can't really drop the price. It really upsets the apple cart with the ones that are under contract for the higher price for the exact same inventory, or the ones that just bought and closed in the last 6 months. It crushes them when they drop their price. But they're in a position where they're like, I got to get rid of this inventory, and they want to liquidate it. So what they do is they end up buying down a rate at $50,000. It ends up costing them, but it never shows up because they use their own mortgage company, their own builder-owned mortgage company, and they eat it on that side to keep the other costs inflated. That really doesn't upset the government too much because they're getting paid their property taxes on the higher amount. Right? So when we're attacking an industry such as the realtors themselves, the public doesn't see this other shenanigans that goes on.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, I always find it ironic, that President Biden in his State of the Union speech in January singled out our industry as charging too much. It's almost laughable. If you talk to any guy that's running a title company right now, when I started running a title company 32 years ago, we could get our margins to 33%. When they made all the changes in 2010, which cut the loan officers' compensation back then, with all the bureaucracy and all, our margins went to 20%. Now, because of all the cybercrime and all the controls that you need, we have to comply with every facet of the Dodd-Frank Act, even though we're not a Fortune 500 company, because we handle other people's money, right? So our margins are at 10%. And now they want to cut us. It's almost laughable. It's like, well, where are we going from 10%, right? I mean, we have to make a living. So we're all under attack right now. We're all in this together. We have to promote our services better. We have to educate people better. We have to be transparent. We have to be fair. And I think you're making great points. We have to demand that other people do that. Like, Maryland's got I think Maryland may be the highest transfer tax in the state.
It's crazy.
No one's saying a damn word.
Talk about that. Tell them how much it is and that kind of thing.
It's in most jurisdictions, it's 2.6 to 3% on the consideration. If you go over $1 million, they're going to surcharge you. Some counties will surcharge you twice, local and state. And
think about that, 3%.
Yeah.
So if you buy a property for $600,000, there's an $18,000 money grab
for them to change the tax bill and scan your document.
It was interesting because, and I may mess this up, but if you all live in Texas, you'll straighten me out. Maybe I remember I was looking at somebody had provided me they wanted me to look at their documents or closing documents that were, for a purchase in Texas. And I was looking for the transfer recordation. It was like $47. Mm-hmm. I'm like, no, that's impossible. It should be like $21,000.
Well, now you know why the person who asked why doesn't BlackRock buy a lot of houses here. It's just very expensive. So there's a product called Title Lock, I guess is what it's called, right? So Title Lock, so everybody always calls me, should I get Title Lock? The answer is no for a lot of reasons. But in Maryland...
Explain what it is.
Well, Title Lock is a service that will monitor sales transactions. And if your property has been sold, they will send you a letter. And then if you didn't sell it, you'll know there was a fraud committed. Okay? So in Maryland, that doesn't happen because the criminal is not going to pay $20,000 to record the deed in the hopes he's going to get away with selling it to someone, right? They're going to go to a state where it's $47 to record a deed. So
how can somebody steal a house?
Well, easy. I mean, I could prepare a deed from Todd Sachs to Dave Thurston and forge your name and forge a notary and send it to Baltimore County and it'll get recorded. But then you're not going to get your tax bill. You're not going to get your water bill. It's going to come. The water bill is going to come to the house, but it's going to come in my name. You'll figure it out. It'll take you.
What does somebody do then? Somebody gets their house stolen. What do they do?
File a lawsuit.
So wait a minute. they can't just go arrest the person that wrongfully forged the deed?
You have to go through some steps. Now, I will tell you this: if you look at title insurance, if you buy the enhanced policies, you have coverage for that. If you buy the basic policy, you don't. A lot of consumers don't know that.
Whoa.
Yeah.
But I hear a lot of people saying at settlement, you don't need the advanced or enhanced policy, just go with this basic. I've heard title closers say that.
Well, I think there are 99 different things that the enhanced policy covers that the basic doesn't, and one of them is a post-settlement forgery. See, a basic title policy is only going to cover you for issues up to the time of settlement.
We're worried about squatters. You're saying something. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, squatters are a problem too. If you have a vacant house, you really need to have somebody checking at it. You can get cameras.
But stay on this house stealing business.
Well, it was very popular in California, Todd, for a while, and it came kind of across the country. I have not heard of any cases in Maryland. I'm sure there's been maybe one or two. I don't know. I haven't heard of any, but I think you can be diligent with monitoring your bills, and like you could go on any website, just about anywhere in the country, and pull up your tax bill. If the tax bill's still in your name, there hasn't been a deed recorded.
But this is a problem for the people that own their home free and clear, right? Or is it a problem if somebody has a mortgage too? I mean, well,
I don't know if the criminals are that smart. Like, I mean, I don't know how they do their evaluations. Certainly, a free and clear house would get them
criminals
more.
Are pretty smart.
Would be easier to steal and sell, right? It would be easier. Now, right now, the imposters are going to raw land, so there are a lot of imposters.
Because it just sits there and nobody questions.
Well, there's no showing, right? There's really not a showing. So you own a piece of raw land in Anne Arundel County. You live 40 minutes by car there. You're not going down there every day and walk through there. So people just they get a fake ID and they sell it as you, and they hope that the title company doesn't ask the right questions, and they sell your land.
Did I ever tell you about the time that somebody set a tent up on my property? I think I may have. I don't know. Did I ever tell you about that?
I don't think so.
So I have a commercial property, right? And I'm not going to say where it is because I don't want somebody going and setting a tent up. But I have a commercial property, and my neighbor called me up one day and said, "Are you having a wedding? What's going on?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Man, there's this tent going up on your property. It's like 100 by 100 feet or something, like a big tent." So of course, my neighbor goes and talks to the person, and the person says that they're having a tent revival on my property, right? Like for a month, 30 days, they're going to have this revival where people can come and give money and get prayed on and stuff like that. And so my neighbor said, "Do you want to talk to this guy?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Man, you got to pack and get off my property." He said, "No." He said, "I'm going to buy this property from you. What do you want for it?" I said, "I'm on my way to get my money, right? Like, you better be gone by the time I get there, right?" I'll shorten the story, but I went there, and I had to call the police that were there, who did absolutely nothing for me. He had a permit for the tent. And this was during the pandemic, when you could just go online and get a tent permit, right? You didn't need to verify that you had a lease or anything, because restaurants and everybody was getting temporary tent permits.
Right.
He got a tent permit. He had a tent permit for my property. Here's what I did. I called the tent company up. I said, "I'll tell you what, I'm going to build tomorrow morning. I've already called the fence company, and they're coming out tomorrow morning, and they are going to fence this entire property on, and fence it in, and I'm locking the gate, and that tent is mine," which was about $40,000 for the tent. And they came and got it.
Sure. Well, the problem is when you have a squatter, what they normally do is they produce a fake lease, and when the police come, they show them the lease. And then once the police have a private document, they'll move it out of the criminal section and tell you have to go to court. And then it takes you 6 to 9 months to get a hearing date. And then the day before the hearing date, they move on and they squat somewhere else. So
What do you think about that?
think about it from what perspective? From the
From
owner's-
a government telling you you have no property rights.
Well, the problem is it's just our judicial system is so slow.
Screwed up?
Well, I don't know if I can say that, but I'm glad you did. I think the problem that we have, as a general rule, what I see, and again, we're in 40 states, so we're dealing with local municipalities all the time. They're very inefficient, and they really don't have any customer service goals. So, like something.
Customer service goals.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
They call us taxpayers instead of clients. We're really clients, right? The money is coming from our pocket to theirs, right? We should be clients.
Whether we're happy or not, they have a job.
Right, you got it. And, there should be ways on certain issues to get expedited hearings. And unfortunately, a lot of those procedures aren't in place at these municipalities, which hurts the law-abiding citizens, not the criminals. So yes, it's a horrible situation. It happens too frequently. It happened to a friend of mine, which was horrible. Did our best to help her. Her husband had died. Suddenly, she moved her and the kids in with mom to try to get through it. Left a really nice house in Roland Park open, and wasn't more than 2 or 3 days there were squatters in there.
All right, so let me ask you a question from a legal standpoint. Suppose the property owner, suppose there was a company out there that would squat too. So you hire a professional squatter to climb in the window or walk through the door or whatever and squat along with the illegal squatter.
Security.
Would that be illegal?
Security firms do it.
Security firms do it. So you can pay them to also squat in the house and just take up, residency with the illegal squatter, make it really hard on them, make it noisy, disruptive, to where they find another place to squat. Is that legal?
Sure. It's your property.
Well, that
You're
might
not
be a way out
violating
there,
any
right?
covenants.
Anybody out there listening that has a security company?
Security companies will do it. It's the way to do it. But a lot of times they'll stake the house out, and if everyone's in there leaves, they'll change locks and all. But that's not a foolproof situation.
There was a situation in Maryland here where the people went away on vacation. People squatted and sold $50,000 worth of their furniture. I mean, get them out of the house. I mean, look, how do you prove that the furniture is gone? They had to have sold it.
Yeah,
think about that. Oh, well, your furniture is gone, but I didn't do anything with it, but we'll leave.
You have to have good.
We just needed a place to stay while you were on vacation.
Unfortunately, you need good security systems, and you really need a trusted neighbor or friend, really almost house sitting, if you're going to leave a house vacant for a long period of time.
Let's take some more questions. We got Melissa behind the scenes tonight. She should be pulling these up for us. She is. We have a super chat here. We appreciate it. Thank you, Austin. Dave, what is the best way to transfer a house and assign the mortgage from living parents to children? Any advice on this subject is welcomed too.
I think it depends state by state. I mean, we use life estates with powers a lot, and there's some reasons to use a with power life estate instead of not a no power life estate. As far as assigning the mortgage, there's a federal law that you don't. There's a due on sale clause. We talked about this when we were talking about subject to deals, right, a few months ago.
Yeah, we have a podcast on it.
Yeah. There's a due on sale clause in the deed of trust, but that doesn't kick in if the deed goes to a family member. So you can transfer that deed to a family member and not disrupt the mortgage. So I'm not sure why they would want to assign the mortgage. As long as that mortgage is going to be paid currently, the bank can't exercise their rights to foreclose because the deed went to a family member. But I'm happy to talk to you offline. We could probably do 3 hours on using real estate as estate planning, how to maximize the tax benefits upon death with steps up in basis and family trusts and those things. That could be a show to itself. But as long as you're transferring to family members, the mortgage isn't an issue. And I like a life estate with powers because I feel like that gives you the best tax advantages when the original owner or the grantor would pass away.
Yeah, and then we'll pin your contact information for anybody that's curious
I'm
about that.
happy to talk to anybody offline.
Yep, so we'll pin your contact information on that because you said something very interesting with titling that property, setting that up, because it is important, especially when a lot of, even when we look at people that are aging, we're seeing now more where they have mortgages on their house because they took advantage of those sub 4%, mortgages. And so that is nice that in doing a proper planning that a family member or, can get that house and keep that mortgage in place might be a great option for them in income generating or just living there themselves and taking advantage of that.
Yeah, and I just left a meeting with a servicer a few hours ago, and there are still incentives for them to modify loans, and they're really starting to ramp up their assumption division because they really feel like there are going to be a lot more assumptions. And I think, for you realtors out there, that's one thing to get your arms around and learn of that process when you list the house. Can that loan be assumed? Because if it can, and they can come up with the cash for the equity, maybe for mom and dad, maybe however they got to do it, you're going to be able to assume a sub 4% rate in a lot of cases.
Yep, and we're seeing it now. And by the way, just for clarification from last week's show, FHA loans are assumable. I did verify that with a loan officer, which means that if you have now a VA or an FHA loan, a mortgage, and you want to sell your house, and for a lot of people that made a bad mistake, they feel that they're financially strapped because they made a decision when the prices of homes were so high. Now having that 4% or even 5% mortgage is a benefit in today's world, in today's rates. So if you're listening and you want to get out of your house that you just bought maybe a year or two ago, and there is a way that you can have someone assume, it is possible to have somebody buy your home and assume that low rate, providing that there isn't a big cash discrepancy from what you're asking and what your mortgage is. So in this case, you'd be better being mortgaged to the hilt. You would be better being mortgaged to the top of the price range. That would be one of the benefits of not putting very much money down now, would be that your buyer would have to put down less money to get an assumable mortgage. So, great advice, Dave. And staying along the terms of the subject too, because I'm seeing a lot of TikTokers, and one of our listeners sent me a video saying, hey, listen to this, what do you think of this? And it was a TikToker that was talking about, and he was a young guy, but was talking about the subject too. And again, if you want to find Dave and I, our conversation on subject two, you can look in our previous videos and find it. Very worthwhile to listen to. But the question is subject to legal. And I think the takeaway was it's not illegal, but the due on sale clause that he's talking about is that a lender can accelerate the whole note if the deed takes place without notifying or paying off that loan or assuming that loan properly. So it is a risk to do that. But Dave, I want to ask you a question to kind of follow up that. There you go. Joe has it right there, buying subject to, so you can look for that thumbnail if you're interested in watching that video. But David, I heard this TikToker said a way around that due on sale is to set the property up or transfer the property into a trust and then buy the trust.
Well, technically, no, it's still a sale. You're still changing the substance of the ownership. So if the lender were to find out, now look, if you make the payments, the lender's probably not going to find out, right? But what the seller has to understand that it stays on their credit. It reduces their borrowing power. And if you don't pay it, the credit gets tanked. Transferring it to a trust, first of all, you really can't buy a trust. You're either a beneficiary or you're not. So that's a tricky thing. You could transfer it to an LLC and buy the LLC.
But a lot of lenders won't allow that.
Well, it's after the fact, so you're still going to violate the due and sale clause.
But if I set up a trust and put my property in that trust and I make you the buyer subject to a beneficiary, would that be a way to do that?
You could do it that way, but if the lender finds out, they're still going to take the position that you violated the due and sale clause.
That the wrong guarantor, that guarantor is no longer in charge or control of the property.
Right, because the due and sale clause is written very broad to favor the lender, and it's going to encompass those transactions. So.
The other thing is, and staying on that, is there is another social media person out there making money on due and sale training. And this particular person says as long as you don't record the deed,
oh geez,
that they will never know. So it's like sort of like a title to a car, right? So even though you have the seller sign the deed and you're holding the deed, but you never register the deed, is that illegal to not register a deed? Is there a time period?
It's not illegal, but it's certainly not a practice you want to do, because in most states it's first in time, first in right. So let's say I transfer you the property subject to. Well, the only reason I'm probably doing that is I'm having some issue financially and I really can't afford the property, right? So I transfer you the deed subject to. You've been told by this great voice of reason just to hold the deed in your safe or underneath your mattress, however you do it, and not record it. And then I go out and I buy a car and I wreck it, and I got $30,000 judgment against me. Your deed's subject to my judgment because my judgment goes on before you record it.
So they can get in trouble.
So you record the deed a year down the road and you go to try to sell it, you're going to pay off my judgments. So come on, who would take?
They're not telling that story, I'm sure, as they're picking up checks.
No.
Yeah.
So I always say, look, I'm not anti-subject to. I think that there is a role for it if you have a good exit plan. You could take it, you could take it subject to, and if you're a contractor, you renovate it with some sweat equity, you put 80 grand into it, you might have added 150,000 of value. Okay? Then you sell it, pay everybody off. That's a good reason to do it, but you have to have an exit plan. And I always say, try to keep it to 6 months. And then you need certain documents to do. I know you don't like them, but.
Yeah, I don't like them because I don't see the investor in this case that's grabbing these properties with no money down and the sellers are still on the hook. I think that a lot of them are, they're kind of.
Well, you can escrow. I mean, if you're representing the seller, you can escrow for the payments. You can escrow for 6 payments and.
Yeah, but they don't have any money. I mean, most of these subject to guys, they don't want to give anything, and a lot of them are reselling the house rent to own, and they're taking a big cash payment from the people that are coming in to rent it. I don't like it at all.
I think there is a very small use for them, but the concerns you have are very well. I hear you. I agree.
All right, here we go. That's next super cash here. Did I say super cash? Melissa, I know you're listening in the background. That one was for you. Super chat. So when you're sitting next to somebody for several years doing this, and she says super cash chat, whatever. It's super chat, I think, according to YouTube, but I just said super cash. So there you go. She's rubbing off on me. Assuming unemployment stays same and Fed cuts rates for political reasons, do you think prices will crash, reach new all-time highs, or stay the same nationally?
Well, I think it's neighborhood by neighborhood. I think, in my primary area, which is beautiful Baltimore and the metropolitan area, if they cut rates, I think you're going to see prices stay where they are, maybe even be a little bit up. But I don't see that rate cut coming. I was totally wrong, like a lot of people. I just think that the employment market's been too strong. And if you look at even what Fannie Mae's saying now is that the average rate for the next 3 years on a 30-year loan is going to be 7. That doesn't mean it might not get to 6.5 for a little bit. Doesn't mean it's not going to be 7.5 for a little bit. They think the mean rate will be 7. The problem we're having, and I don't want to be political here, but the problem we're having is, like most governments, we're spending way too much money. And I think the Fed finally, is saying, we tried everything, but if you keep spending money, it's not going to work. And I think our government's spending way too much money. And I think that's a problem. That's not a Democratic criticism or a Republican criticism. I think it's indicative of both parties. We're spending too much money.
Yeah, I think certainly, I think the issue is, in my opinion, is that the government's too big. I mean, I think that they have to spend so much money to keep this machine going, right? And the issue that I have with the whole soup is that the Federal Reserve, I don't like the way they manipulate the markets. And they do that by manipulating the interest rate. That is that Fed rate, that overnight trading rate that banks borrow money from the government to generate these loans. And it's all digital. They say printing money. They're not printing money. They're a click of a mouse. They're just adding it to the ledger, right? So when they transfer, from one computer to the next, to fund this $1 million loan purchase or what have you, and allows them to scrape off their profit off from the delta, right? So I mean, when we're looking at the fact that when you drop interest rates that banks can lend money out, when you drop those rates to 0 and allow a lender to make the same profit by offering a 4% mortgage, and I'm just specifically talking about mortgages in our industry.
Sure.
Of course, asset prices are going to skyrocket.
Yeah,
they're going to skyrocket because you made money cheaper. So when you do that, you're manipulating the market by allowing the payment, because we've trained. Here's what we've done: we've trained Americans. And this is I don't care about the global issue as much as I care about what's happening right here in our country. But what happens is we're training people that it's not the price, it's the payment that you pay for it. And that's the big lie. That's the machine that's making the banks wealthy. Because what happens is it is a problem with what you pay. Because when asset prices correct, you can't necessarily sell that, or they don't even need to correct. The money part, the payment part adjusts to the point that nobody can afford your asset. So they're locking consumers into these loans or these assets that they can't liquidate necessarily, because now the payments are too high, so people can't sell that just bought without losing a lot of money. I think it's the manipulating of the market that bothers me the most.
Yeah, I think they overreacted both ways, right? I think that when COVID hit, instead of gathering the facts, they cut it to 0. They put a PPP program in. It made no sense at all. The PPP program came in. It wasn't based on whether your sales decreased. It's based on whether you kept your payroll.
Yeah.
Well, there were people that quadrupled sales and got PPP money. So this didn't make any sense.
In this business.
Sure.
In this business.
Didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So that program was ill-conceived. I think a overreaction. And then I think that going
which, by the way, that wasn't the current administration.
Correct.
So I mean, when you look at it,
it's a red and a blue problem. It's a red and a blue
point.
problem. It's
Yeah.
a red and a blue problem. And then you look at things. I mean, I don't want to go too far off the thing here, but we've kind of lost our way. We can't pass just a bill like the infrastructure bill. I think everybody agrees in concept is great until you really read what it is, and only a small percentage of it's going to actually fix infrastructure. it's all going to special interest.
Right.
So, we have an issue in that we have career politicians, and they're not making the best decisions for the citizens. They're making the best decisions for themselves. And again, that's a red and a blue statement.
Yeah.
That's not a bipartisan statement.
Yeah. No. The problem is now that we're in this situation but I want to address the rest of this question
Sure.
in a different way, because, and Raju, we appreciate your comment here. Assuming unemployment stays the same, well, first of all, you have to believe that the unemployment numbers are right.
Yeah.
Right? And from a lot of people that I've spoken with and that know this business way better than me, I'm a real estate broker, I'm not an economist, and I'm not a politician, obviously. But the way that they calculate this, from my understanding, is that once you've been on unemployment a year, you're no longer even counted. Right. So I don't think we have the right unemployment numbers to even judge that question, but this is what you're seeing in headline news. And the Fed rate cut. So I just want to remind everybody that in the GFC, the global financial crisis, which happened, a lot of people say the great financial crisis, but it happens to be a mortgage. It was a mortgage crisis, and it was a housing market crisis, amongst other things, besides being a massive recession, and where a lot of people lost their homes and lost their businesses as well. And unemployment rates skyrocketed. Who knows what the real rates were, but the issue is that the rate cuts were too late at that point, because they dropped the rates too in 2007.
Yeah.
And it didn't work.
Yeah, I think we're a global economy now, and I think what we're seeing is that when they try to do something, now lowering it to zero had an impact pretty quickly, but when they're lowering it 0.25% or raising it 0.25%, that change is very, very slow to impact the economy. And I'll say one thing about unemployment. I don't know what's the unemployment rate now. If you believe the rate, is it 3.5?
3.5%.
Okay, here's the problem. I don't see that going up, because you have a large percentage of our population that's not employable. And now you have a mental health crisis that's only going to get worse. If you look at the statistics with the younger age groups who have had more time on their phones, we're kind of lucky. Phones came in later in our lives and we were kind of on our path and all. But if you look at 14 to 24-year-old citizens who've had a phone their whole life, and look at the percentage of mental illness, and that group is just not, as a group. Now certainly there are exceptions. I'm not trying to make anybody mad here. That group's not going to fill this void, I don't think, when these jobs turn over, and you have people healthier longer that are more capable of working. I have friends of mine that are 70 and say, I feel great. I'm playing golf twice a week and I go fishing on Sundays, and why would I give up my job? I feel great and I'm doing a great job at it. So I just don't see unemployment getting higher. I don't know if it'll get lower. To me, we're at full employment because of the large group of people that really aren't capable of working.
Wait till AI kicks in.
Well, see, that's a bigger problem, and that ties into the immigration crisis, right? The border crisis, because you're really importing through the border now. Nobody's going through proper channels. You're really importing a welfare class, and you have AI that's going to eliminate a lot of lower level jobs.
Government spending's not going to get any less.
Well, when you got to buy the votes, that's what happens.
All right, let's take another question here. And we're rolling right along. You guys, great questions here. So we have another super chat here. Austin, agents will list homes on the MLS without directly marketing commission. Listing will say offering up to 3% of value in seller concessions. Thoughts?
Well, I think that's certainly what our local organization has taken the position you can do. I know that Fannie and Freddie are putting out, maybe have already put some things out about allowing seller concessions to be rolled into the loan amount, even an agent's commission.
Financing their commission. So pay 3 times the amount for the commission alone. How's that going to affect the appraisal?
I think they're going to give concessions for it. I just don't think they know what to do, and I think they know people need housing.
maybe they should have thought about that before the federal judge signed off on this lawsuit.
Well, it's like anything else, right? We were here, it's going to go here, then it's eventually going to come back to the middle, and people will learn how to function with it. But there's opportunity. I think, again, educate yourself. There's opportunities there.
Well, I think Austin's right. I mean, I think that's what's going to happen. And but think about the mess that you're talking to a seller. Okay, here's the deal. What do you want to offer in concessions and contributions?
Nothing.
What do we get here?
Am I the seller? Nothing.
Nothing.
Right.
And to your point, we have, here is what a lot of people don't realize, and this is why they argue the fact that we won't see any kind of real estate crash or adjustment, asset price adjustment. And when I talk about asset price adjustment, I'm just talking about where the American populace will be able to afford, or with a median income, a median price home. I'm not talking about anything beyond that. That in itself is an asset adjustment, or we just won't have people owning homes. But let's just stay along the narrative that they wish to push home ownership, because that's what the government, I mean, we're 35% when it comes down to it, on average of GDP, has to do with housing related services from ownership, not landlords.
But they took all the tax incentives out of owning a home.
But let's say this, because when you look at, to your point, as a seller, what do you want to pay? And we have a poll, by the way. We'll get to that in 1 second. So you're a seller, and you don't want to pay anything.
No.
And now all of a sudden the inventory rises, and the market shifts to a buyer's market. We get 6 months of inventory, which, by the way, is already in most states of new construction. They have more than 6 months of inventory, 7 months. We saw, in the fall of 23, the worst new housing market ever, or at least for one of the worst markets.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden the paradigm shifts, and there's more inventory, and there's less buyer demand compared to the amount of inventory that's on the market. Now what?
Well, now I'm going to pay the buyer agent 4, and I'm going to pay you the listing agent. I'm going to pay you 1.
But you're not allowed to offer your compensation up on the MLS.
You can put 4% concession or 5% concession. I mean, you guys do the listing appointments, right? So don't most sellers say, hey, I need to net $400,000 out of this, Todd. I heard you're the best in the business. I need to net $400,000. However you get me there, that's on you. When I leave the table, I need $400,000.
I mean, rarely have I had a seller that said, I want to net as much as I possibly can. They have,
but
that's what they say.
But they have a baseline, right?
Yeah,
Most of them?
I mean, what they're asking is, what can you get me, right? I mean, what can you net me at the end of the day? Because,
they're spoiled.
Yeah, because they want to know, they want it all, and I get it. It's their asset. They want it all. I mean, if you were a seller, you're going to want it all. Of course, right? You're a buyer, you're going to want to pay as less as possible. But the issue here is with people thinking that this will never turn, and it will, and it's coming, and what's going to happen. And I'm not saying that asset prices won't go back up, because they always do, right? I mean, I just had an interview with Harry Dent, and I know, a lot of people, there was a lot of controversy on that, because Harry said, and our videos, you can watch it, it's had a lot of views, and the comments are very flavorful. I mean, it's you want a bowl of comments where you can, say, well, and get a good, be entertained. But Harry says that home prices will never be this high, that we have seen the absolute cap of home prices, and that they will fall a minimum of 50%, is what he says. A minimum of 50%. A lot of people say, well, that would just take us back. Here you go. Oh, well, that's the wrong one. That's Steve Hankey. But a lot of people say that, it's Harry Dent's video, Joe. But a lot of people say that if it fell 50%, a lot of people believe that it is possible, that we would only be back to 2020 prices.
Well, I would
There we
probably,
go.
I would
There we
probably need to know a little bit more about the population shift, right? We certainly have more people from the ages of 25 to 35 than any other demographic in the country. They're going to need a place to live, and they're going to need a place to live for 65 to 75 years because their life expectancy is 100. Now, there's no secret to it that children, and we both have children around, yours are a little bit younger, but they're young adults, that are having less children, having children later, and they're having less children. So eventually, and I think that's some of the problems that these other, like China's having a huge population problem right now. I think that 35, 40 years down the road, our population could be significantly less in America than it is now, unless
Unless we let them
immigration.
come home.
But then it used to be that we allowed the best and the brightest come here. So, and that was a very, very helpful thing for our country. It built our country in some respects. But we had hard work.
Most of us are immigrants.
Right. So I'm not anti, I'm just saying smart policies. And so, I would
Or
need
I'll
to know-
say most of us, our ancestors were
Sure,
immigrants, right?
sure,
You know
sure.
what I meant there. Just
But
for
I think I would
clarification.
need to know a little bit more about the population. Certainly there are some price pressures in states that are desirable to live, but there's a lot of land. You still have a lot of land in Texas, like Austin. You still have a lot of land in Nashville. Desirable places to live, but those prices are coming down a little bit because there is competition between existing homes and new homes.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have that necessarily in the Northeast because there's very little land left.
Well, we have a lot of land left. Go up in a helicopter or fly over. We have a lot of land, but we have a lot of regulations that make it impossible
That's
to,
what I mean.
to take care of that land, right?
Exactly.
Yep. So let's check out the poll. I'm kind of curious. This is kind of like, if you guys haven't voted yet, we'd love to know your vote. We have 547 and counting. The question was, who should pay the buyer's agent commissions? And this is really interesting because we almost have a complete divide here. 35% said that the seller should pay the buyer's agent. 36% says that the buyer should pay their own agent. And 28% of you said that there should be no agent. So we'll try and remember to check that. If you guys want to cast your votes, and be curious to see what you all think about who should be paying, if at all. So, all right.
26% said there should be no agents.
No buyer's agents.
No buyer's agents.
No buyer's agents. What do you have to say about that?
I think there are a lot of first-time home buyers that are completely lost in the process. And if you're a seller's agent and you follow agency rules, you're not really legally allowed to help them. So they need
Depending on
help.
which state you're in.
You know more about
Yeah,
those.
there's only 13 states that has this, no dual agency,
Gotcha.
which means that in other states, like neighboring DC, which isn't a state, but DC, right? You have to have a separate license, and Virginia.
Right.
You're really talking about that they think that an agent can be basically a fiduciary to the transaction by representing both the buyer and the seller in the same transaction.
Well, I think in some transactions you could do it, but you got to know when there's a conflict. Attorneys do it all the time. But you have to disclose it, and you have to know if there's a conflict, you have to recuse yourself. But, that's a hard question, Todd. You asked me that question a couple months ago, and it's still a difficult question because, we deal directly with the consumers a lot. And I think a good agent is worth what they're getting paid.
Can a buyer and a seller come to you as a title attorney and you do the contract for them and facilitate the deal?
I can, and we've done that with the right disclosures, but you still have to understand that if you have a home inspection that goes wrong or something that goes wrong, they have to get separate counsel. They have to try to work it out, right? Now, what we would normally do in that situation is me as an attorney would represent the seller. We would advise the buyer that they should have representation, A lot of times the people are related when this is happening, so you don't have the necessary disclosure that you would have with the condition of the property and all those things. But we have to be transparent with them, and if there's a problem, we have to, if it can't be resolved amicably, they have to be, mediation or whatever it is. We haven't ran into any issues that way. But again, the vast majority of those transactions are aunt selling to nephew, mom and dad gifting some and selling to son or daughter. So those things aren't as traditional.
Yeah.
Situation.
I mean, there are a lot of people that think that a buyer and seller should just be able to communicate and work it out themselves, just like you would post your car up in Auto Trader, or post something in Facebook Marketplace and say, hey, I want to sell my house. In fact, a lot of people think, as long as they can just get the proper disclosures, that they could even get through a home inspection and work it out if they could save a lot of money in doing so. What would be the downside? What would be the ultimate downside? So if a buyer and a seller who essentially, when you have a real estate agent, and obviously, I mean, it's my business, and I'm saying this because everyone's trying to figure out where we're going in the industry and how we can best serve the public. Because I think the companies that figure that out are going to be the ones that survive, right? I mean, I think, you learn, as competition heats up or as regulation or deregulation takes place. But let's just say that you have buyers and sellers. A buyer wants to buy a house, a seller wants to sell a house. What would be wrong with a buyer and a seller just making their own negotiations, signing a contract, having even a home inspection, and dealing with it and negotiating it through? A lot of people think that that would be a win-win. And here's what I'll say to add to that before you answer. If I'm a seller, I would rather a buyer have an inspection and have every inspection. I would rather have that than a buyer that says I don't want an inspection. Because I, as a seller, I feel would be more liable in disclosure law than if they had an independent source that they hired come and check it out. So let's say we go that route and a seller is all about bring your inspectors in here, get whatever inspection you want, and we'll negotiate away, but at least we bring it to the forefront. You know what you're buying. What would be wrong with that?
I think it can be done in some instances, but I think that most buyers and sellers are completely uneducated about the process.
Well, when you're talking about a lot of money, they may read a book.
Yeah, but there's not necessarily good information on the internet, as you know.
I mean, we're doing it right now. We're giving people good information right now.
I think as we progress down this road, there will be some changes. I do think you'll see more of that, but I do think there is a place. If you're a good agent and you're really, really advocating for your client, I think there's a value to that, and I think there's a place for you. Now the question is, we certainly have probably per capita way too many agents, right? Especially when you look at the volume of the. You'll know the stats better than me, but if you need, what they're saying now is a single person would have to make $90,000 a year to live comfortably in this country now, and a married couple has to make maybe 150, 170, maybe 160. So whatever that number is, how many agents are making that number? Like how many agents are making 90,000, right?
Well, a lot of them, it's dual career, and that's why, right? Because they can do that. I think if you were to say that you had to be a profession in this and that you had to do it full time, and if there were a way of doing that, you would automatically lose most of the agents. But I think we're going to see a big, attrition more than, we have now. But I think the bulk, maybe even 70% of the agents probably don't make a living.
And you might end up seeing, these discounted buyer sides where hey, look, we're gonna give you this, we're gonna make sure you know the software where to find the house.
Yeah.
We're gonna review the contract or whatever it is.
Yeah.
We're gonna order your termite, order your inspection. We're gonna be for a flat fee of something, we're gonna facilitate it. That might be where some of it goes, but it's funny because the old one was you had a list to last, right?
Yes.
But I think the market's going to change it. I just think that I think there's going to be times when the value is going to be having the buyers, and there's going to be time when the value is having the listing.
Oh, let's take some more questions. All right, another super chat here. We appreciate it. Using the math, if rates go from 3 to 7%, price has to drop about 30%, or income has to rise 40%, using 45% debt to income and no other debt. Gotta be the former.
I think that on average, the same house, you could have got at 3 when it went to 7. Same house, same terms, was $1,100 more a month, maybe. So
Yeah, well, I don't see, do you see income going up 40%?
I think wages. I mean, I think wages have risen some, but I don't think they were 40%. I think it still, small business is still controlling most of the payroll in this country. I think it was hard for small business to give people 4% and 5% raises. So no, it didn't go 40%, which is why, which is why we're seeing mom and dad step in and buy this down. And then, you talked about a little bit about the builders trying to preserve value and buying the rates down. I mean, that only helps you for a few years. There's still a...
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
The 2-1 rate buy down, whatever, 3-2-1, whatever it is. Essentially, your rate is the same the day you buy it. It's high. And it just takes 2 or 3 years for that to kick in.
I think there's a place for that if you're going to have some life-changing experience in 2 or 3 years where you're getting some certification.
You're a doctor.
Right.
Maybe you're just coming out of residency.
But if your income's only going to go up 2% a year, I don't know how you're going to eat the $1,200 difference or whatever it's going to be in the payment.
Yeah. All right, let's take another question. Guys, we appreciate, great questions, by the way, great questions. Ramsey, so Raju, thank you again for your super chat here. Ramsey says, housing never crashes. He was dead wrong once during the GFC. I think he is disingenuous due to his skin in the game. Thoughts? So, are you familiar with Dave Ramsey?
No.
So Dave Ramsey, and I think Dave Ramsey does a lot of great, things for people that are in debt or that are trying to achieve some kind of financial freedom. I personally think that debt is bad. I was always raised on that. I think that the banks are, if you're using money to make money, I think it can be a good thing with leverage, so long as you're not over leveraging or putting yourself in a position where you can't liquidate or be in a liquid position. But the problem is with debt, the income it's a snapshot in time. So when people are buying houses right now and they're being qualified for as much loan as they can in most cases with as little money down and no money in the bank and rising costs, it's a very dangerous spot, because if something happens that one of the borrowers or the borrower themselves loses their job, they're automatically in a financial crisis if they have no reserves. And it's a long-term commitment buying a house. So, Dave Ramsey believes in you should be financially free and free of debt. And I think that aspect is good. But the question here is, because he's a real estate investor and owns however many millions of dollars in assets debt-free, how he has been able to do it is fantastic. I don't think we're talking about normal, home ownership, where somebody's buying basic needs of a roof over their head. So I don't agree with him that he says that prices don't come down, because they do. If you look over the history of time, you have most of the housing market prices come down in the same calendar year. The best time for the seller to get the most amount of money in a traditional real estate market is prior to June, probably June 15th, because once graduations happen in May, vacations start in June, then you have back to school, then you have holiday season. People aren't thinking about relocating or putting their kids through a change in the middle of a school year.
Sure.
So I think, traditionally speaking, home prices go up and down in the same calendar year. But when you've seen asset prices, and I'm not saying all assets are going to crash, and I'm not saying that, price ranges are going to crash, or that all markets are going to crash equally alike. But I do think that we're going to see adjustments, and I think that Dave Ramsey is wrong when he says that this won't be a asset correction. Thoughts on that? You agree with me or disagree?
Well, I mean, again, a lot of it's jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but I think that we still have a supply problem.
In Maryland, we have that bad. We still are selling multiple offers over list price in a lot of cases.
Sure. So I think if you're in a place where there's a supply problem, I think the houses will hold. I think telling a young couple that's just married they shouldn't have debt. I mean, it's not realistic. Very few people are starting a marriage with $800,000 laying around.
But you don't have to buy a McMansion either.
Well, I think really that's going to be the trend, right? I think that people will buy smaller houses, even though they might think they're overpaying compared to prior. They'll slowly renovate them and make them their own, and they'll keep them longer. And I think this younger generation is more in line with not the McMansion type thing, the minimalized house.
But that's all they're building right now, on most of the country,
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Raju, again, and let's go ahead and take another question here. All right, if you have a buyer's agreement with a broker and buy a for sale by owner on your own, do you have to pay your broker's commission?
Sometimes you do. You got to read the agreement.
Yeah, unless it's etched out to where it says if I find a house. I mean, look, agreements, what a lot of people don't realize is that, commissions are negotiable, but so are the agreement that you sign, right? So if you're looking at an agreement and you're not okay with the terms, they can modify that agreement, or you can find another agent. So, if there is a situation, and I always say this to my agents, because a lot of times the agent won't look for sale by owners. And nowhere in our licensing requirement does it say that we are only showing houses that are listed on the MLS. Correct. It's a very dangerous territory.
Correct.
So I always give the scenario, let's say your buyer buys a house and the next door neighbor walks over and says, congratulations, welcome to the neighborhood. So glad to meet you, my new neighbor. But I'm just kind of curious, Dave, why didn't you buy the house on the one block over that actually has more upgrades than this house, and it's the exact same floor plan and it was less money?
Correct.
And then the buyer says, well, I didn't know about that one. Now, you could say shame on the buyer, but you could also say to the agent, why didn't you tell me about the for sale by owner that was right down the street? And a lot of agents sway away from it because they say, well, the for sale by owner is because they don't want to offer a commission, right? And which is the case a lot of times, because that's why they're a for sale by owner. Why else would you do it? What do you think about that from a legal standpoint?
What would you have told your grandmom to do?
Let me list the house for her.
Again, I think it's you got to be ethical, and I think that I've seen plenty of for sale by owners where they've cooperated if they know the market.
Well, you knock on the door, you say, hey, my name is Todd Sachs from Sachs Realty. I have my buyer in the car. We'd love to see your house. Yeah. Are you cooperating? Are you out for cooperation? No, I'm not going to pay any of these sleazy buyer's agents because you all suck. Well, I'm going to go back to the car and I'm going to say, hey, Dave, just want to let you know they think that buyer's agents are terrible and they're not going to give me anything. You want to still see the house because we got an agreement. You can pay me. Obviously, we can work that out. And what are you going to say? Hey, let's go check out the house.
Sure.
So now I need to make sure I'm giving proper disclosure to the seller. I have to give them in Maryland a form that says I represent the buyer. Don't tell me anything that you don't want. That you
no, but I think what you just said is how you handle it. But I think if you're taking a long-term view of your career, you let the person see the for sale by owner.
Yeah, you negotiate whatever it is that you sign. And you put your client's needs first. You're not saying that, look, I'm not working for free intentionally.
Right.
I mean, if you want me to be of value, I can't because I'm not in a position where I'm just doing charity work. But the bottom line is, let's talk about it. And that's the missing, I think this is what you've said all along, is there hasn't been transparency.
But in your situation, if you let your buyer walk in that house by themselves, what's the likelihood they can really get that transaction consummated and get it to settlement?
I don't know. If they call Dave Thurston, probably pretty good.
if they know to call.
Right.
You have to understand, most people hate attorneys more than they hate agents. So
I don't know, man.
I'm a little lower.
I don't know.
I'm a little lower.
Do we
on
put
that.
car salesmen in that bucket or no? I mean, that's what
think
I hear
we're-
most.
I think we're in there with car sales.
Yeah, that's what I hear most. You guys are just like used car salesmen. And if you're a used car salesman,
You know what they say about
no
attorneys,
dig.
Todd?
Huh?
You know what they say about attorneys?
What's
right?
that?
99% of them give the rest a bad name.
Oh, yeah, there you go. That might be the same as agents. All right, let's take another question as we wind down here tonight. We appreciate Dave Thurston, Crown Title. I do want to just plug SachsRealty.com for a moment. Guys, we do have an amazing broker network. If you decide that you still want to work with an agent, and we think you should, all right, I don't want you to think that I'm advocating that you should do this on your own. However, we do have some online courses that are about to come on that are going to teach buyers and sellers at the very least how to transact and what to expect as if you didn't have an agent. So at least if you decide to go that way, whether you're a buyer or seller, we're going to have some good courses for you coming soon. They're not going to be free, but they will be very affordable. And I would recommend that anybody, once we launch these, you'll know about it. I would recommend anybody taking them that are interested in buying or selling a house. We'll bundle them, have some a la carte on that. But I do think that everyone should be more educated. We also want to plug our agent network all around the country. If you need an agent anywhere other than Maryland, obviously, if you're in Maryland, don't call anybody else but me, right? Reach out to me. We can pop my email up on the screen. Send me an email. Melissa will, probably be the one that's reaching out. Sometimes it takes a day or two or a week for us to get back to you because we do get a lot of inquiries, but we want to help each and every one of you. So send me an email. But we do have an amazing broker network that you can pick your state, drill down to your city, and find somebody that is in your area that can help you buy or sell or rent or lease. But anyway, and we do want to plug Mr. Thurston here with Crown Title because he's part of our broker network and trusted resource. Obviously, we wouldn't be sitting here with him right now if we didn't think that he was adding good value. So, if you need estate planning or whatever it is, setting up a property, reach out to Dave. There's his website there. We really do value his time that he is providing for everyone. So let's take another couple questions and then we'll kind of wind this thing down, let you talk about title and what you really do for a living. But let's take a couple more. Michael Church here says, what is the price to income ratio in these hot markets? I'm seeing over 50% in some cases. When you're looking at median income, and I'm talking about as far as debt to income ratio in what some lenders will allow for mortgages. But in a lot of the hot markets now, we're seeing 8 or 9 times, as high as 8 or 9 times median income for median price home. So thanks for the question, Michael. It's not sustainable.
Back ratios on rent is in the mid 60s now.
Crazy.
So
means they can't pay anything else but
consumers getting beat up pretty good right now.
Yep. Actually, Paul says, question, the market outside of LA isn't slowing down and doesn't follow the trends in other parts of the country. What advice do you have for first-time buyer in these times? Save as much money as you can. If you're going to buy, I would say pay down your principal as much as you can. Try and reduce that, that loan balance that you're paying the high interest on. Anything?
I think when I was a much younger man, I always tried to make an extra payment or two a year if I could. It shaves so much off the back end. So I think it's great advice.
Yeah. All right. So let's go ahead. Let's turn over to Dave for a minute. We'll put the camera on Dave, and Dave just kind of gives some advice on title work and things like that.
Well, I think who you work with makes a difference. So we always tell everyone, if you're buying or selling a property anywhere in the country, we can help you. And we want that title company to be supported by an attorney in case a legal question would come up or an issue would come up. The vast majority of title research we do or properties do have a title issue that we resolve. And so the other thing I would tell you is be very, very careful with wire fraud, especially now with the advent of AI. I think the statistics show that in 2022, there was $5 billion of wire fraud in the United States. And I think in 2023, there was 12 billion. So it's really, 2.5 times what it was. So what we try to say is we solve and protect. So if there's any issues with your title or the legal process of clearing the title and getting you a clear deed, we would solve that problem prior to closing, and then we protect in that we safeguard your funds. So when you give the funds over to our escrow account, we pay off the liens, pay off the judgment, pay off the seller, record the pay the money to record the deed, and get you clear title. So I'm happy to be a resource to you at any time. We are licensed nationally. I'm available anytime to help you with any structuring of transactions. We do a lot of large commercial transactions, assumptions, anything involving a piece of real estate, we can help you. So, and I think Todd will have my number up on the screen. You know, what most people don't understand about title is that, and a lot of people say, well, don't buy the title insurance, it's not worth it, but it is. Title insurance is really just a one-time fee when you go to settlement. More importantly, if an issue were to arise after settlement, it pays for your representation. It would pay for an attorney to resolve that issue for you. So a lot of times the title insurance policy will only cost you $600, $700, $800. If you had a problem that was an intervening lien or something in your gap protection, then that one payment of $800 would buy you legal representation to resolve the problem. And what happens with title is there are on-record risk and off-record risk. So on-record risk is what we can go to the courthouse, research, and resolve. But there are all kind of off-record risk that can't be discovered. And that's really why you need a title insurance policy, is really to protect yourself against the off-record risk. And a prime example of that would be if an estate was probated wrong. They missed an heir or missed the lien on the estate. That title insurance policy would cover you. So I'm happy at any time. My information's up on Todd's website. Any questions you would have about our practice or how we can help you, don't hesitate to give me a call.
I think it's very good advice, Dave, as always. And guys, we appreciate it. Let's take a couple more questions before we sign off here. Any good resources to help for sale by owners?
Well, I think there's information on the internet. I'm not sure it's always great information, but I think there's information on the internet. But I do think if you're not going to use an agent, I do think you have to find an attorney that you trust, that understands the market, and at least pay them to guide you through it. I mean, I'm not advocating that service because I really do think good agents have a role in this. But if you think you can go at it alone and you have some business acumen and you're financially able to understand the process, understand the mortgage terms you're allowed to get and those things, I think a good attorney can be a good resource for you.
I think, at least in Maryland, and I'm sure that other states are the same way, you can go on the Maryland Real Estate Commission website or the DLLR, and I'm sure you can do it in any state, and you can see what forms are required. And I think if you're a seller, I think it's important to know that there are certain forms that a seller needs to disclose to potential buyers about their home. And I think that's a big thing. Here, Joe's pulled up the Maryland Real Estate Commission. But, for instance, if you're pre-1978 in Maryland, you have a federal lead paint disclosure form that needs to be filed or filled out or disclosed, whether if there's lead paint in the home, do you have any reports on that? The buyer has to, have an opportunity for a risk assessment. I mean, that's just one of our state laws. Also, disclosure disclaimer. And I think the big thing is for sellers that are selling a property is that if you know of things that we call them latent defects. And so, in other words, something that if a buyer were to walk through your home and they can't see it during a physical inspection, a visual inspection, something that you know is part that is wrong, that you just covered it up. And, maybe it's a cracked foundation where you just drywalled over top of it, or you just put a Band-Aid on something and hid it. You hid it from the buyer, and that was something that could harm them either physically or any of their guests, anybody. It could cause physical harm, or that the buyer would have a financial harm. That is called a latent defect. And then it goes further than that into what we call material facts. And if I'm a listing agent, I'm working for, just to give you an example, I'm working for a seller, and I walk into their basement. We have basements here in Maryland, and I can clearly see a water line. And a lot of people say, well, agents aren't supposed to know, what a house, things about a house. They're just supposed to advertise it and sell it. Well, that's not really true, because as an agent, there are things that if I see that could be potential problems, I have to ask the seller about it. So I may go in a basement and say, look, this looks like a water line here. Has your basement ever flooded? And they say no. And I clearly don't believe it, because I know what water damage looks like. I may need to disclose that to the buyer's agent at least, and say, if there is a buyer's agent, say, hey, look, there's a water line in the basement. My client says it's never flooded, but I think you should probably be aware of it and should check it out. There are certain things you can't just bury your head to when you think or know that there could be a potential problem that exists, even if you represent the seller. So I think if you're a for sale by owner, you should know what forms are required by law. You should document things and disclose things that could be a potential lawsuit for you. But the biggest thing I want to tell you is your safety is number one. And I think one of the big things with selling a house on your own is you're really opening yourself up to perpetrators potentially. And this is not a fear tactic, it's just a fact. I always tell people when we're doing open houses and I'm working with agents in an open house, that after the or showing, you have to keep your eyes on the people that are there, because a lot of times people will go in the house, even with an agent, a buyer's agent, and they'll split up. And the one will go this way, one will go that way, and obviously I can't keep my eye on everybody. And I have a tendency to say, let's stay together, because we're going to walk through the house. This is occupied, because jewelry could come up missing at the very least, money, whatever. But here's what we don't want to happen: is a lot of times a perpetrator will walk through a house and open a window. And then after you show the house, you drive off, they drive around the block, the seller's gone, and they just climb through the window and can, rob the house, and they're out of there before the seller comes back home, right? And so I think because sellers leave during the showing. So I think, from a safety aspect, you should know who's coming through your home. At least with an agent, I would hope that they've qualified them, that they have a pre-qualification, that they've had some type of check, because they had to have their credit pulled and things like that. They get a pre-qual letter, and that they've had some kind of a meeting prior to going through your home with an agent, where maybe an ID was even copied. And if you're an agent and you're not doing this, you're an idiot. You're putting yourself at risk of a crime yourself by not knowing who you're meeting at a property alone, and a vacant property maybe at that, or nobody else there. So I think the biggest thing for sellers is to make sure before you let somebody into your house that you're gathering as much information as you can before you set the appointment. Maybe look them up, ask where they live now, do they own a home? Look them up in public records. Just kind of make sure that you're identifying, and maybe through social media you can even get a visual, so that when the people are coming, that they look like what you saw on Facebook or Instagram. And these are just things, that come to my mind that I worry about for sellers, just introducing complete strangers from an ad or a sign, come on and walk through my home. Good resources would be Sachs Realty's podcast. What you're listening to right now, we tell a lot about what you should be doing as a buyer or a seller. So, great question.
Great advice.
Thanks, Dave. Question here: is cash still king?
Yes.
100%. I'm looking at deals right now, right? Because obviously there's two bad things for any property that's being sold. One is that it hits back to the market. So an agent out there, and this is what you guys, why we always preach that you should have a good listing agent, is because that agent needs to help you look at your offers, your multiple offers, and to where the seller just doesn't get, stars in their eyes about the offer price. If it has financing, chances are it needs to appraise. So you could offer them the moon. If they can't get financing for it, you're only getting appraised value for your home, unless that appraisal contingency is waived. But what happens is, if I have two deals that are similar in nature, and one is cash and one is financing, even if the cash is less, a certain percentage less, let's just say the house is $800,000, and you're looking at an offer that's $10,000 less than a finance deal, I'm probably going to advise my client to take the money. The cleanest deal that has no financing contingency, things that can't go wrong, because a lot of the backouts that we're seeing right now has everything to do with they can't get the loan. And there are as many bad loan officers out there as there are bad agents or any other type of professionals.
I was going to say, I think it's really, really important you work with an experienced loan officer that knows your local market.
Yep.
And not a national on the internet. They're an eighth of a point less.
Exactly.
That's a long road.
All right, so we'll take one more question tonight, guys. We love you. We thank you for spending your Tuesday nights with us. And keep those comments coming, by the way, because Dave is very reachable, and we'll see that we get the comments. If he doesn't see them directly or the questions, keep them coming. If you are watching this after we've gone live, we'll make sure that we get your answers, your questions answered. So final question here, Dan in the Dirt, we appreciate you. Should we use an attorney for an FHA loan for a home versus a buyer's agent?
I think it depends. I think if you know the house and you know the seller, and you're not going to look at 30 houses or 20 houses, or maybe. I think there's a role for it. But unfortunately right now, if you're a buyer, most likely you're not getting your first, you're not going to put one offer in and get it right now in most markets. Now, granted, there might be some exceptions, but I think if it's going to be a longer process, I think you need an experienced agent that knows the neighborhood you want to live in and can guide you through those issues. If it's a deal where you know the seller, or the seller is a family member, the loan really doesn't matter too much, the structure of the deal. If you have a good loan officer, they're going to really tell us if you're going to qualify or not, and they should know that up front. If you've been transparent with your application, they should know that up front.
Last question I have for you, Dave.
Okay.
Should somebody buy a house without a home inspection?
No.
Okay. I knew
not
that.
Not unless you're getting a great deal and you have a lot of money.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. All right, guys, we love you. David, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. If I could help you, give me a call.
All right, we'll see you next time.